would the president pardon or commute his son if he's convicted?
So I've answered this question before. It was asked of me not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, and I was very clear and I said no.
I'm extremely proud of my son, Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
After years of President Biden and his staff saying repeatedly he would not pardon his son, Hunter, over the holiday weekend, he did just that, granting Hunter a full and unconditional pardon. In his announcement, the president called his son's prosecution, quote, selective and unfair, and said his political opponents in Congress instigated and imposed political pressure on the prosecution to attack him. President Biden's decision to pardon his son is sending shockwaves through Washington, bringing reactions from both sides of the aisle, many critical of Biden. But some experts say the move may have opened a Pandora's box, as the president-elect and others are on the right are now indicating similar pardons may be granted to people convicted in the January 6th, 2021 attack on the Capitol when Trump takes office next month. Joining me now is the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels, with more insight. Brett, as always, it's great to see you. You know, one of the biggest stories this weekend was President Biden's pardoning of his son, Hunter. We know that reactions from both sides of the aisle have been flooding in, Republicans expressing outrage with mixed reactions coming from Democrats. The president argued that the charges brought against his son were purely due to political reasons. Michael LaRosa, former press secretary for First Lady Jill Biden, had this to say earlier on the Hill rising.
It's the second major reversal in 6 months that will have damaging consequences on the party that he leads and turning over to somebody else. And so I think it's unfortunately an unnecessary slap at his legacy, another one.
Brett, Biden has spent, 5 decades in public service in the government. Is this the defining moment of his legacy?
Yeah, Julie, as you said, Joe Biden is certainly somebody who's been in the public eye for decades. He has a lengthy track record and sort of resume that people will contemplate when he leaves the White House next month. And from folks I've talked to, I think that there is some skepticism that this is the one thing that folks will remember him for. Certainly his decision to run again in 2024 and then ultimately drop out about 100 days before Election Day sort of looms over his entire first term. But, as we heard from Michael LaRosa and as we've heard from others, this is certainly a controversial, to say the least, decision by President Biden, especially because, as we saw, he repeatedly said he was not going to pardon his son. And on top of that, he spent much of his first term talking about restoring norms, restoring faith in the Justice Department as an independent institution. And so then for him to sort of weigh in here and step in and grant his son a full and unconditional pardon, sort of contradicts and undercuts that messaging.
Turning to some of this Republican reaction, we know that Republican lawmakers and President Trump himself have slammed Biden's pardoning of Hunter. And Trump, to be honest, used the same tool during his presidency, as we know a lot of past presidents have. Towards the end of their term, Trump pardoned National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, his political ally Roger Stone, his campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and even Jared Kushner's father, Charles, who I might add was just nominated to be ambassador of France. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had this to say about Biden's decision today during a reporter gaggle. Let's take a listen.
The president believed enough is enough, and the president took action. And he also believes that they tried to break his son in order to break him.
Brett, some of the reactions we've heard from Democrats, they haven't all been defending Biden. We've seen some Democrats, like Colorado Governor Jared Polis, for example, suggest that this could set a bad precedent. Do you think it sets that, a negative precedent? And do you think we could now see Trump turn around and pardon the January 6th rioters?
Yeah, well, as you said, Julia, it's not totally unheard of for presidents to pardon, if not family members, then close allies or folks with access to the White House. Certainly, we saw President-elect Trump do that during his first term. We saw Bill Clinton, when he was in office, pardon a family member. So controversial pardons are not unheard of, but certainly that is, I think, one of the great concerns with this move by Biden, among Democrats at least, is that he is, giving cover to President-elect Trump to take action and pardon the January 6th rioters, those who were imprisoned for their role on January 6th when the Capitol was attacked by folks trying to stop the certification of the 2020 election. President-elect Trump has spoken for years really about, the fact that he was interested in pardoning these rioters, that was something on his to-do list, especially early on, maybe even on day one in office. So, it may be that he was going to do that anyway, but now by President Biden pardoning his son, it sort of gives President-elect Trump and Republicans cover to say, well, who are Democrats to be critical of this if he's going to pardon his own son? And I think that is one of the frustrations with Democrats with this move by President Biden.
Well, and President Trump has certainly invoked the idea of, potentially pardoning January 6th rioters recently, on Truth Social, and have compared them to Hunter Biden. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Want to switch gears a bit. Lawmakers returned to Washington today, and with just 18 days left until government funding expires, all eyes are on Speaker Mike Johnson with how he will navigate a deal through the House. Neither side of the aisle wants a shutdown. So, Brett, what can we expect to see play out?
Yeah, I think this is a case where neither side is really interested in holding out or dragging this out, especially into the holidays. I think the expectation is that a deal is going to get done. Certainly, there are some moving parts here. The length of the continuing resolution that's likely to be struck here. How long will it take us into the new year, into the new administration, where Republicans, I think, would like the incoming Trump administration to sort of be able to put their stamp on a longer term funding deal. Disaster aid is something to watch. Certainly, the White House has asked for billions of dollars in assistance in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and other storms that have ravaged the East Coast, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, South Carolina, etc. So whether that gets done as part of this deal is worth watching, and then whether there are any outstanding legislative priorities, whether it's a farm bill that has long been talked about but has been struggling to get across the finish line, or something else that maybe gets wrapped into this sort of year-end spending bill.
I want to turn to the other big story from this past weekend, and that was Trump's nomination of Kash Patel as FBI director. Patel, a Trump loyalist, has called for shutting down the FBI's Washington headquarters and bringing the nation's law enforcement agencies to heel. Brett, what vision is Patel set to bring to the FBI if he is confirmed? Would he automatically be seen as a yes man for President-elect Trump?
Yeah, I think, that's certainly one of the concerns for critics of this nomination. I think, Patel is somebody who, as you said, he has spoken very critically about the FBI. He has spoken about, going after members of the media, going after members of the quote unquote deep state that certain Trump allies feel opposed the president-elect during his first term. In some of his podcast appearances, some of his writings, he singled out officials who he felt wronged the President-elect Trump during his first term, whether it was Chris Wray, the current FBI director, members of the Justice Department, Andrew McCabe, a former DOJ official, or anybody involved in the Russia investigation. He's really singled folks out and suggested that they could and should face retribution for some of their actions. So I think this is a nomination that is really sounding alarms for critics who feel like this is a case of Trump following through on some of these threats of retribution, of revenge, of going after folks who went after him. And to say nothing of the fact that Kash Patel is not exactly an experienced leader in the FBI or somebody who has experience leading the bureau. So certainly I think this is a impending confirmation fight that will be one to watch.
Well, and speaking of people who have experience leading the bureau, we know that the nomination of Patel sort of suggests that Trump would oust or fire Christopher Wray, the FBI director, who he appointed in 2017. But he's, serving this 10-year term that expires in 2027. So there's a gap. What are we going to see play out here? I mean, is this a sure sign that Trump will fire Wray?
Yeah, that's sort of the implication. As you mentioned, obviously, Chris Wray, somebody that Trump appointed in the first place, but then over the years sort of lost confidence in as the FBI, didn't sort of bend to Trump's will or go along with his claims about, the Russia investigation and things of that nature. The feud sort of intensified in the wake of this assassination attempt on Trump in July, where Chris Wray initially didn't outright say it was a bullet that hit then candidate Trump. And so, tensions were sort of further inflamed there. But this nomination of Kash Patel certainly does suggest that Trump is ready to oust Chris Wray before his term expires. There are some folks like Senator Mike Rounds, a Republican, who over the weekend suggested that maybe Trump hasn't fully decided whether he's going to oust Wray, and that this nomination is just sort of testing the waters or seeing how it's received. But I think that's maybe wishful thinking on the part of Republicans who would like to see Chris Wray serve out the remainder of his term.
One more announcement that Trump made over the weekend was nominating Sheriff Chad Chronister for administrator of the DEA. The president-elect campaigned heavily on promises to curb the flow of fentanyl and other drugs into the country. Is this seen as a safe pick for Trump, Brett?
Certainly compared to his other picks, I think it's fair to call it on the safer side. He's a sheriff. He obviously has law enforcement experience. He's from Florida, which is aligned with a lot of his other administration picks. Obviously, you look at Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, some other folks who are coming from the Sunshine State to fill his administration. He's faced a little criticism, Chad Chronister has. Thomas Massey, a Republican lawmaker from Kentucky, pointed to the arrest of a pastor during COVID lockdowns in 2020 to suggest that, he's not qualified for this role. But, I think this is going to be somebody who has law enforcement experience in a law enforcement role, is going to be somebody who is not going to struggle to win over Republican support, certainly in the way that some of these other Trump nominees might struggle to win over Republican support. And obviously the GOP, having 53 seats in the Senate, they can afford to even lose a few Republican votes, even if they don't get any Democratic support, and still get these nominees across the finish line.
And I want to turn towards the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in a letter that Democrats will work with Republicans on Trump's nominations, but has urged the GOP to follow traditional vetting standards. Brett, what are some of Schumer's biggest concerns, and will we see the president-elect's transition team try to actually bypass FBI background checks?
Yeah, well, on the first point, I think Senator Schumer and other Democrats are particularly concerned that Republicans are just going to be a rubber stamp for some of these nominees. They're trying to really encourage Republicans to remember that the Senate plays a role here in the advice and consent side of things, that they can and should vet these candidates seriously. Folks like Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Some of these other nominees who Kash Patel for the FBI, as we mentioned, some of these nominees who are a little more controversial. Democrats are hoping Republicans in the Senate won't just be a rubber stamp and, go along with whoever Trump picks because he's the president. As far as the FBI background checks go, so far, the Trump transition has not, signed any kind of memorandum of understanding with the Justice Department that was sort of get those background checks underway. As we mentioned, Trump is pretty distrustful of the FBI, so this sort of feeds into that narrative. And it seems like he's prepared to just kind of go forward with this without having those done ahead of time, and may just kind of worry about it once these folks are confirmed.
A lot to watch out for ahead of the new year and ahead of the new administration that's set to take place in the middle of January. Brett Samuels, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Julia.
President Biden's pardon of his son Hunter has given new fuel to Republicans who have long argued the justice system holds them to a different standard. News Nation's Robert Sherman is in Mar-a-Lago as the president-elect and his transition team are vowing to overhaul the justice system.
The case against Hunter Biden has been a consistent attack line for the Trump team on the campaign trail and in recent weeks as well. And with the news coming down that President Biden intends to pardon Hunter Biden, the Trump team hitting the White House over the move. This is a statement put out by Stephen Chung, a spokesperson for Team Trump, saying, quote, "The failed witch hunts against President Trump had proven that the Democrat-controlled Department of Justice and other radical prosecutors are guilty of weaponizing the justice system. That system of justice must be fixed and due process must be restored for all Americans," which is exactly what President Trump will do as he returns to the White House with an overwhelming mandate from the American people. The president-elect for months on end has criticized the Department of Justice, the FBI, and similar prosecutorial institutions over what he calls a two-tier system of justice. And this is something that the Trump team is pointing to as further evidence of that, with laws being applied to one group of people but not to the other, according to his allegations there. And that is a big emphasis that he has as he's set to assume the White House in January, is that one of his top priorities is overhauling the justice system, whether that be the the Department of Justice or the FBI. That is something that he has said consistently and has vowed to make good on his word on. Julia?
The Supreme Court returned to the bench following the Thanksgiving holiday and is slated to hear arguments on several high-profile cases this week. On the docket on Wednesday is a case brought by several transgender youth from Tennessee, arguing their state's ban on medical care is discriminatory and claiming it violates the state's constitution, due process, and the equal protection clauses. The case will not only have an effect on how much access young people have to gender-affirming care like puberty blockers and hormone treatments, it will also go a long way to determine protections afforded to transgender people in the future. Meantime, the High Court is set to hear arguments in a case on Monday that has to do with the FDA's regulation of sweet and candy-flavored vape products. News Nation's Mills Hayes has the details of the appeal.
The case in front of the Supreme Court today is about whether the FDA handled the regulation of these sweet-flavored tobacco products correctly, or if they sent these vape companies on an arbitrary, quote, wild goose chase of requirements. The High Court is taking up an appeal from the Food and Drug Administration, which has denied more than 1 million applications to sell candy or fruit-flavored products that the administration claims appeals to kids. If the court rules that the FDA carried out its oversight in a legal and correct manner, that could deal a huge blow to tobacco companies and how they market these sweet-flavored products. On the other hand, if the Supreme Court rules against the FDA, then the administration will be forced to reevaluate millions of applications that were rejected since 2021, which FDA officials say will overwhelm an agency already struggling with limited resources. This hearing is happening as President-elect Trump has vowed to protect the vaping industry when he posted on social media back in September saying, quote, I saved flavored vaping in 2019, and it greatly helped people get off smoking. I raised the age to 21, keeping it away from kids. I'll save vaping again. The good news, the FDA says that youth e-cigarette use is at the lowest it's been in decades. The number of youth who used e-cigarettes in 2024 is approximately 1/3 of what it was at its peak in 2019, when over 5 million youth reported current e-cigarette use. But anti-vaping organizations say it's still unacceptable that 1.6 million teens vape or use e-cigarettes. It's addictive, and according to medical experts, it's just not safe. One addiction specialist at the Mayo Clinic says that the amount of nicotine in a vape cartridge is significantly higher than the amount of nicotine a teenager could be exposed to in a cigarette. A teen puffing on a vape playing video games for an hour could be the same amount of nicotine consumption as a pack of cigarettes. There are public health studies that show vaping is safer than cigarettes. E-cigarettes work better than nicotine patches, as well as certain prescription medications to help people quit smoking. At 10 o'clock today, lawyers representing the FDA and Triton will lay out their arguments and then answer questions from the 9 Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court will render a decision on the case later this session, probably next spring in 2025. In Chicago, Mills Hayes.
The holiday shopping season is here, and a retail trade industry group is forecasting record sales in the United States. In today's Political Minute, Mike Vaquera, News Nation's Washington bureau chief, breaks down the numbers in the forecast.
Will this holiday shopping season set a new record? I'm Mike Vaquera, Washington bureau chief at News Nation. The holiday shopping season is here, and this year, retailers are expecting record sales as Americans head to the stores and shop online. The National Retail Federation estimates Americans could rack up as much as $989 billion in total holiday spending. That's based on an expected increase of between 2.5 and 3.5% this year from last year's total of $955.6 billion. Online sales are driving much of the growth. Retailers expect online and other non-store sales to increase 8 to 9% and account for up to about $298 billion in total holiday spending. In all, the country has less time to buy this year. The holiday shopping season between Thanksgiving and Christmas is 5 days shorter this year than last. I'm Mike Vaquera, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
And you can find more news and analysis from Mike and our friends 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. Meantime, winter weather is hammering the Northeast and the Great Lakes regions. Caitlin Becker is there with a look at what's in store for residents.
Well, Julia, it is so cold. The wind chill is not to be trifled with. And this lake effect snow that came blowing in from the Great Lakes region, it stranded cars and really threw a wrench into holiday travel. And this same area that got absolutely pummeled by all of that snow, well, they're bracing for round 2, with forecasters saying the snow is going to continue throughout the whole week. This morning, people shoveling their way out of feet of snow as winter advisories remain in place. Parts of Michigan, Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania buried in more than 2 feet.
It's been wild to go from no snow to, 2 feet in one weekend, especially with the, record warm temperatures and stuff that we've had. It's been a lot to go from that to kind of switch gears.
Erie getting the worst of it. Cars stuck in traffic, some motorists stranded. The mayor assuring residents.
Well, it was really hard at first because there was so much snow and, people weren't adjusting to it. But I think it's gotten much better now. And we encourage everyone to please stay off the streets for now. Just stay home. Let us get control of it.
The winter weather even threatened to derail Sunday night football, and we couldn't have that happen. The Buffalo Bills paid fans $20 an hour to shovel. By early Monday, well over 2 feet of snow dumped over the Great Lakes region, with some communities getting more than 3 feet. Look at this massive difference. This is over the course of just a few days. Interstate 90 has now reopened after a ban this weekend on commercial trucks along sections in New York near the Pennsylvania state line. And the winter weather is not letting up. Lake effect snow warnings remaining in place as more snow blasts this region this week, bringing potentially 2 to 6 feet of snow to some areas by Tuesday. The heaviest expected along the belly of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario in Pennsylvania and New York. There is some good news here. The power seems to be holding out. Only a handful of outages have been reported so far. And we know that aside from treacherous road conditions, no power is where things can get really, really dangerous for residents in this frigid weather. So a little bit of a silver lining there, Julia.
And thank you, Caitlin Becker, for your reporting. Be sure to stay warm out there. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And be sure to come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.